Archbishop, we're almost at the halfway stage of 2025. How would you sum up the year so far?
Well, I suppose a great deal of what I do is routine. So there's all that routine stuff, which is the bread and butter of one's life, which is working in the diocese, working in the Church of Ireland at large, and doing other things with the Anglican Communion. And I'm really get a chance to say something about that a bit later because of a big event that's going to happen in Belfast in 2026 for the Anglican Communion. But the unusual things that happened, obviously, where you can't really plan for a Pope dying and another one's ministry being started. So I'd met Pope Francis 2 or 3 times, as individually and with the Anglican primates when we met in Rome. And he was an immensely warm man, immensely warm presence, very, very talkative, but also quite infirm by the time I met him, in the sense that he would be able to walk into a room, but he would sit for the whole of the conversation. But nevertheless, you are very aware that you're in the presence of this enormously significant world figure, and at least 2 of the encyclicals that he wrote, Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, were prophetic oracles and will be very significant documents for a very, very long time to come. And then having the opportunity, which was completely unexpected because I didn't anticipate being part of the Anglican Communion delegation to the inauguration of the ministry of the new Pope, to then have an opportunity to meet what in those terms quite a young person, he's 69, who's the same age as me, but obviously quite fit, and that when he walked, he sort of strides into a room. He's someone full of purpose and a kind of a very calm centre. And unlike Francis, at least in the very limited experience I had of him, not talkative, but someone who listens a great deal, and you're conscious that he's listening to what's being said. And in the few words that I had with him during the audience, I simply said that I wanted to say that both Archbishop Eamon and I would be delighted if he was able to come to Ireland. And I had hoped that simply saying one simple thing, that it might kind of register, rather than, I mean, there were lots of people who took quite a bit of time to speak to him, and they were being sort of ushered out of the way. So I had hoped that one simple thing, although peculiarly enough, he spoke in Italian to me as well. He hasn't yet really in public spoken in English. And I think that's because of the consciousness that popes have in their early days of being bishops of Rome, to the city of Rome. And they want to, I suppose, let Romans know that they haven't forgot about them. And his Italian is absolutely impeccable.
How's yours?
Well, it's not as good as his, but I can understand it well enough. But his, for a natural English speaker and someone from Chicago, it was quite a strong accent. It really is remarkable.
Do you think that Pope Leo will actually accept the invitation, take up the invitation to visit Ireland?
Well, I hope he does. I no doubt he has lots of other things on his agenda. In the address that he gave to those of us from the Ecumenical movement and from World Faiths who were there at that audience, he, not unnaturally in that environment, emphasised his commitment to reconciliation and to unity. And I would hope that the extraordinarily warm relationships that have developed in Ireland over the years between ourselves and our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters at every level would be a thing that could be celebrated and talked about and encouraged, and certainly would be by a papal visit.
There was a very significant presence in Rome, both for the funeral of Francis and the inauguration of Leo, or Cardinal Provost, as he was known. How do you think your presence as an Anglican leader went down with that huge delegation of Irish Roman Catholics?
Well, I mean, I certainly got lots of messages to say. Well, first of all, that they were very pleased to see what we were able to say at the death of Francis, to reflect on how remarkable a person he was, and how we were able to welcome Leo, which people know wouldn't have been possible really not all that long ago. And of course, it'll not suit everybody. Some people would think that we shouldn't have gone. But the commitment of church leaders across the world to the fact that if you're strong in the convictions of your own tradition, then you can meet anybody. And what you're really doing there in those sorts of occasions is you're like comparing family photographs almost. You're saying, this is my family, what's your family like? And everybody loves their family more than they love anybody else's family. But at the same time, it doesn't stop them from admiring aspects of the other family. And there are, of course, the immense treasury of the Catholic tradition, particularly the tradition of spirituality, is something which we draw on all the time now.
Will that relationship, do you think, strengthen under the guidance, stewardship, and I suppose the managerial prowess of someone like Pope Leo?
Well, it's a very divided world. There are places which before, and I'm thinking particularly of the United States, which would have been seen as not a divided country, as a country that had a very strong common interest in the good of the United States, and people from very different parts of the political spectrum had that underlying allegiance that prevented the kind of polarization which has now taken place. So you have a world leader who sees his task as unifying people, whereas in a lot of places around the world, political leaders see their role as dividing, that is, of picking an issue that they know will divide and of accentuating that issue rather than doing the sort of, which is the way of electoral politics, but it's not the way to govern. So I think Leo has a place to play, and you know, he is one of the few internationally recognized world figures and world leaders. So I've no doubt he maybe not say too much too often, but there will be judicious words and judicious conversations.
Can I bring you to back home at this point and ask what your take on some of the awful and dreadful scenes we've seen on the streets and attacks that have taken place on people's homes simply because they're perceived not to be from this place? I know you touched on that in your address at General Synod. It must be very disappointing for you to see the events that we've all seen unfold.
Yeah, I mean, the wave of migration which has taken place into Western Europe over the past 10 or 15 years, the one group of people who it's not the fault of is of those who are coming in. The governments of the countries in which they live, or the governments of the countries in which they're coming to, have formulated policies that make it difficult for people to move. Yet there's a very strong sense of people that they want to be free and they want to be prosperous and they want to do well for their families, so they'll move, and they're here. And whatever the political priorities are, whatever the policies are that are needed to address that, and there, of course, the whole idea of migration needs to be addressed sensibly. The response of the Christian Church is to welcome the stranger. There's no kind of ambiguity about that. It may mean that, and of course you may take all sorts of views on the political front as a Christian believer. You may say, I would much rather that immigration was much more tightly controlled or whatever. But when you have people in your midst, your vocation is to care for them and to accord to them the respect which their humanity, which was given to them by God, requires. And can you imagine what it must feel like to be in one of those houses or one of those facilities where there are people outside sort of howling almost for your blood, and how very uncomfortable that must feel for people who really all they want to do is to work and to make a living and to provide for their families and for their children. And it's not their fault that somebody has made it awkward for them to do that. So I think, as I said in that synod address, it's the one area of solidarity that we need to show. We need to show that we are all members of the human race, created by God, given dignity by God as individuals, and to respect that dignity.
Staying with Synod, could I ask what your major takeaways were from the gathering that took place in Nice in May?
Well, it was a quiet-ish synod. I mean, if you're the president of the synod, that's not a bad thing for you, because, as you know, it's a very large gathering, over 450 people. And in many ways, it's because they cooperate with the rules that it can happen at all. So it was quiet in that sense. There were one or two. I thought that the introduction of the idea again, whether weddings should be allowed, or whether Church of Ireland clergy should be allowed to conduct weddings other than in places of worship consecrated to the Church of Ireland for worship, was an interesting development. It had been debated a number of years ago, and it was fairly clear it maybe would have been something like a 60-40 split at the standing committee. The impression I have is that the wind is blowing towards greater flexibility, in that I'm not going to say what my own views are, because at least with the church you're kind of away in control of what's going on, and you don't necessarily have to fall in with all the slightly stranger notions of the wedding industry, you know. But we'll see how that debate goes. It was a lovely venue, I have to say. I've never been in Naas in my life before. Why would I have been in Naas? But it was a lovely, pretty well unspoiled Irish market town, and there aren't very many left. And I thought that the atmosphere and the tone of the debates was, as well, not quite always, but was civil and well conducted.
And the prospect of electronic voting?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that is inevitable, because certainly when you're coming down to quite narrow votes, the whole idea of blocks of seats and then tellers counting in their block and then writing it down on a piece of paper, which has served us pretty well up to now, but people aren't used to writing things on bits of paper anymore and totting them up. It's a different. So electronic voting, I think, is probably going to happen, but we would need to make sure we equip ourselves for it properly, so that it can be done in a kind of an orderly way. Because if you have 450 people there and it's not done in an orderly way, it's like a big classroom where everybody's talking to one another about how it's just not going to work.
Of course, electronic voting, I suppose, symbolises the fact that the church isn't standing still. There are lots of exciting things about to happen in the pipeline, as it were, for the church itself, moving to brand new, perhaps purpose-built facilities in Dublin, major investment, big changes for the church.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the big change on the ministerial side that has happened over the past number of years is ordained local ministry, where we have, much to our surprise, found ourselves ordaining whatever it is, 60 or 70 people to that specific form of diaconal and priestly ministry, which is without a doubt a movement of the Holy Spirit in the church, and that has left us with some work to do about integrating that into the canonical structures of the church. And also, the newest thing isn't to do with buildings, it's to do with pioneer ministry. It's to do with approving these 4 or 5 projects every year, which are specifically funded to reach out to people who really have no connection with church or with the faith at all. And we've been talking about it for a long time. We have now moved it from being a project to being mainstream, to being part of the DNA of the Church of Ireland. And that is a very significant development for us.
In overall terms, then, how would you assess the health, the vibrancy of the Church of Ireland?
Well, it's to some degree it's difficult for a bishop, because every time you go somewhere, people turn up because it's for a confirmation, so there are lots of hours for an anniversary or whatever. But from the figures in the census and from the figures in the survey that was done by the youth department, where they were able to say there were over 1,800 adult volunteers in youth activities in the Church of Ireland, and that was by no means all, because there were quite a number of people didn't respond to that survey. So that does seem to indicate that we're back in some sort of good shape, and we know the data, and we know where we're starting from now, so we can begin from this new post-COVID data to see how we move forward.
It was a busy, as I said at the very outset, a busy five and a half months for you. What's the remainder of 2025 look like?
Well, hopefully it's not as unpredictable as at least what happened sort of April, May time. The summer's quieter, although there's always something to be done. The autumn tends to be pretty well straightforward parish and diocesan and Church of Ireland activities. In 2026, rather than 2025, there are the the triennial meeting of the Anglican Consultative Council will take place in Belfast, and that's when clergy and lay people from across the whole of the Anglican Communion come together to resolve to do certain things. It's one of the instruments of unity within the Anglican Communion. So it's a very important body. It only meets in person once every 3 years. That's in Belfast in June, July 2026. So there's a lot of planning as the hosts has to go into that.
Archbishop McDowell, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much.